Good morning, aspirants. Welcome to Dhanu's YouTube channel. This is SAMEEKSHA series. As I said, SAMEEKSHA is reviewing the Hindu, that is today's Hindu, the 20th September 2022. What we are taking the content from this paper for the mains. We are going to discuss what are the things that are important from the today's newspaper called the Hindu to the so-called how you can apply that to our mains component. Let's start with the first thing that is called, let me quickly go to the discussion of the paper. So this is today's Hindu newspaper. So this I have taken from the editorial or from the so-called edition of Visakhapatnam's edition. Now, let me quickly enter into the topic of the day. The first article is about Tharoor to take on Gehlot in Congress presidential elections. Now, this is something which we can hail because this is speaking about inner party democracy. Inside a political party, we always should have inner party democracy. As a result, this can be studied as in a democratic country, the party should give democracy even to the party members. Hence now Congress is going through that line that is called both the it is contesting or it is opening for presidential elections inside Congress. Now that is being contested by Tharoor and Gehlot, where you can use it ethics in politics, inner party democracy. Right. Next, death penalty. Supreme Court moves for fair hearing. What is this entirely? This is again something a very positive outlook for the so-called convicts or for those who were given death penalty. Now, what the Supreme Court is saying that the convicts were given death penalty without a fair trial, without listening to them. As a result, what they are saying is you have to give them, the accused is to be given a chance of mitigation his circumstances. Now what it is present only when the accused was convicted, then they were giving the so-called a chance. But what it is saying before conviction, just like during the trials itself, we have to give a chance to the so-called the accused to present his case. Now, what is a normal procedure? Normal procedure will be there will be an accused person. He will be standing aside, and then the judgments will be carrying out. Right. In the end, what happens? In the end, the court will listen to the accused and they give the pronouncements. Now, this is the case. Now, what Supreme Court is telling that when you are giving death penalty, don't make the accused to wait till the end. Give him an opportunity in the middle, in the course of duration of the trial himself, so that he can or she can represent their case. So this is what the court is telling. Again, this is something which is very substantial. The editorial of the Hindu today is also carried on the similar lines. So this is something a noteworthy thing. We have to come out with what the committee which is appointed by the Supreme Court is going to come out. It has referred this case to the so-called constitutional bench. Now the constitutional bench has to come out with what they are going to say on this. But this is something which is noteworthy. CM didn't keep the promise, says Kerala governor. Yesterday we have discussed this. Kerala governor Muhammad Arif Khan, he has said that the government of Kerala is not looking into those charges which have tried him to get who tried to attack him. Right, in 2020, some groups tried to attack the governor inside Kerala. Now, what he is asking the chief minister is the chief minister should take this role. Right, should take responsibility and commit a committee to look into this. But the chief minister is not looking that. Yesterday he said that I am going to conduct a press meet, and he has conducted a press meet. Now, chief minister versus governor's spat is being heard here. So you can consider this as a dispute between federal relations, a dispute between the chief minister and the so-called executive head versus the legislative head inside the state. Next, 23 years on, Kashmiris to relish entertainment in halls. Very drastic or very good move that can happen to the so-called people of Kashmir. Now, this is something which we can never imagine, that in a state of India, there are no cinema halls. In all the states we do have these cinema theaters where people go and enjoy their rights, but in Jammu and Kashmir for 23 years there was no cinema halls or no theaters at all. Now this is something like a cinema theater as per Amitabh Bachchan, right? A cinema theater is a place where people of different mentalities meet, they laugh for the same joke, they cry for the same emotional scenes. So it is a binding force. Now it is a developmental strategy. This is what the government of India is looking at. Now, government of India and the so-called Jammu and Kashmir government, under the leadership of the so-called the governor of Jammu and Kashmir, Lieutenant Governor of Jammu and Kashmir, they started entertainment back. That is, they started building up the so-called theaters, right? INOX theaters in the Jammu and Kashmir. Now, this is something in the way back in 1996 they tried to reopen, but because of the poor patronage that they have got and the militants attack on the terror on these halls theaters made their theaters to close. Since then until today the theaters didn't function. This is something which is very ironic in a state like India, which has happened in one of the states like India, which has happened. Now this is some democratic norms again, freedom of speech, people coming together, sharing their experiences. This can change the Jammu Kashmir face altogether. So you can consider this as an example of developmental strategy. Now, further, this is local news. We have not much in this. Moving on to the south, temple donations to CM's fund is philanthropic. Now, there was one temple called Guruvayur Temple in Kerala during 2018 Kerala floods. This temple authorities have donated 5 crore rupees to the so-called CM Relief Fund. Now, few people have petitioned this in the High Court, saying that this is the temple money, we should not use this for the so-called political things. But what the Supreme Court recently said is, Supreme Court said that temple donation to this activity is a philanthropic thing, and he is saying that Lord Sri Krishna himself said that we go for Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the world is one family. So it is not right to say that we should restrict the benevolence, the goodness only to those who enter into premises. They are doing it for a philanthropic attitude, and this can be something which can be appreciated thing. So where you can use this in humanity service, as Swami Vivekananda said, service to mankind is service to the so-called God, right? So Supreme Court also gave this judgment. This can be used in Indian secularism, where religion can play a role in the politics, politics can play a good role in the religion, right? Both are complementing each other. This is best example of Indian secularism. You can write the same example in polity, you can write the same example in ethics, you can write the same example in your essay writing also. Further, moving on, this is editorials. The first editorial is knowing the killer, that is death penalty. The same thing, death penalty can be issued only in the rarest of the rare cases. The victim, the accused, has to be given a fair chance before pronouncing a judgment against the accused or pronouncing death penalty to him. So what it is saying, the same discussion that I had in the paper one. So this is about rights of individuals, rights of convicts, and the so-called rights of human citizens when you are going for death penalty, right? Now what the Supreme Court said is, don't just in various cases Supreme Court said that death penalty has to be given only in the rarest of the rare case, and here you should not only look at the so-called gruesome nature of the so-called crime that has been committed, but also you should look at the socio-economic background of the accused. You should also look at the state of mind of the victim, right? Whenever these three combinations has to be looked before giving the so-called death penalty. Death penalty is something, capital punishment is something which is always discussed in India as far as the so-called the rights of citizens is considered, right? So this is again something which will be there in the news for the coming days also. Let's wait what it is going to happen, right? But for now, you can use this in uh, polity, you can use this in human rights issues, you can use this in ethics, right? Further, the best of the four, this is about the Indian wrestler, Mr. Bajrang Punia, who has won fourth medal in the so-called World Championship. Now, why and where you can use? This is the personal commitment. Though he is suffering from many odds, right? He was suffering some due to personal injuries also, but he has regained his strength and he has fought very well. This is not just winning laurels for the country, but it is something like showing some examples, being a role model to the so-called society. So Bajrang Punia, by winning his fourth world championship title, despite the odds, what are the odds? Struggling injuries, that resulted in his different from displayed a grit to come back. This display of grit, ambition, commitment is something which we have to applaud, and we can use this as a case study also, right? It is the people of Pakistan who are suffering. Now, Fabian, the former ambassador to the Pakistan, he is writing that, the former ambassador, he is writing that now Pakistan is under severe crisis. What is the crisis? Pakistan is reeling under floods, and what is the response that India government should give? Now, there was some tussle between Pakistan and India. We all know this. What is the tussle, right? The tussle is the so-called India always looks Pakistan to the terrorist angle, and more or less Pakistan also looks India in one angle, that is called through the so-called Jammu and Kashmir. After this abrogation of Article 370 and making Jammu and Kashmir outside, or giving this Jammu and Kashmir, removing special status to the so-called Jammu Kashmir, now Pakistan has stopped trade route with the so-called India. Now what he is saying is, if you are stopping trade route with India, what you are going to get? Right. So it is saying that during the times of crisis, one should overcome the so-called problem of uh, political disputes and look at the humanity. It is the people who are going to suffer, not the Pakistani state. It is the people who are going to suffer. Now, where you can use this has a very little relevance. Just know that Pakistan is reeling under pressure, and India and Pakistan, though Indian government, particularly our Prime Minister Narendra Modi, said that he has expressed concern towards the Pakistan during these floods. Nonetheless, the Pakistani government was not opening its gates for Indian aid to reach to that area because of that obligation of Article 370. This is tussle which happens. Obviously, as Kautilya said, in international relations, political interests dominate rather than the so-called subjective interests. So maybe or may not be, this might be an idealistic proposal. The realists say that, okay, let's wait for the chance. So nothing substantial in this article, so you can easily leave it. The first one is the hijab case as in the essential practice doctrine. Leave it. It is not going to add much value because the hijab case is still under consideration in Supreme Court. Let's wait for the judgment, what the Supreme Court says, and then we can discuss this substantially. From Lodha to Ramana, the Chief Judges of or Chief Justices of Modi era. A beautiful article which was compiled by the so-called the former Chief Justice of Delhi High Court, Mr. A.P. Shaw. He is also the Law Commission Chairman, and he has beautifully connoted about all the 8 Supreme Court judges right from the time of 2014 to 2022. In the last 9 years or 8 years of Modi's rule, 8 chief judges were appointed to the Supreme Court, and he has given a wonderful analysis of how executive have overlapped with the judiciary, or how judiciary stood to the executive at times, and how they have fought with the executive at times. And he said that what are the existing problems in the judiciary at present, and what are the problems of judiciary in the coming days. Obviously, I'm going to make a separate article in this discussion because this is something which is beauty out of the map, called A.P. Shah. He himself, being a Chief Justice, has clearly pointed out what are the problems here. I'll make a separate video on this. Watch it, it is going to help you. So, it requires some basic understanding of the subject, so I'll take that as a thing. So, what I prefer is, if you do not have the time for the day to read, go through this paper, go through this article. This is the article of the day, I can say you. Just have a look at it, and I request you to just study that so that your comprehension abilities are going to increase substantially, right? Moving further, Supreme Court panel meets, sorry, not Supreme Court, Scheduled Caste panel meets Lakhimpur Kheri victims' family, right? Now, we all know that recently two Dalit sisters from Uttar Pradesh, Lakhimpur area, they were found hanging from the so-called tree, and police have arrested 6 people related to this case, and Commission of National Commission of Scheduled Caste. So they have sought action. So now this commission is National Commission on Scheduled Caste. They visited this Lakhimpur Keri, and they were talking to the so-called victims' family. So this is something the role played by uh, constitutional bodies like National Commission for SCs, National Commission for STs. Last year, mains 2022, this year they asked a question on National Commission for OBCs. So similar types of questions might be found in the so-called GS paper, and if you are PSIR student, you have to go through this. Where you can use this, you can use this to protect the so-called rights of vulnerable sections. What are the authors, what are the institutions that you have, what are the executive actions that you have. So have an idea about this along with the constitutional norms that they have. So simply, you can remember this: in Lakhimpur Kheri, 2 Dalit girls were hanged. This shows something called social tensions between the so-called upper caste and Dalits, and this shows that exploitation of vulnerable sections, this is called Dalits or scheduled caste, in some parts of the country, which is very ironical, which is continuing even after the 75th Independence Day. Right. Next is, you can also write about the role that is played by constitutional institutions like National Commission for SCs, STs in protecting the rights of vulnerable sections. Right. In these areas, you can use this. Further, Election Commission of India seeks restrictions on cash donations to political parties. Right now, this is something like bringing the Election Commission of India wants to bring transparency in political funding. So, in order to ensure transparency and accountability, Mr. Chief Election Commissioner, Mr. Rajiv Kumar, has written a letter to the Union Law Minister, Kiran Rijiju, saying that we have to reduce the cash flow or donations in the form of cash to the so-called political parties. At present, one can donate up to 20,000 rupees in cash to any political party as a political party funding. Now they are saying that get back from 20,000 to 2,000 and make the rest through electronic transfer, which means it is going to clean election funding to ensure cleanliness in election funding, removing black money. They are doing this. Let's wait and see how it is going to do. Now you can use the same ethics in political attitudes. You can use this, the role played by Election Commission of India to instill free and fair elections. This is something which is very important for the so-called democracy. In all these things you can use, because elections are the backbone of democracy. A clean election system is very, very essential for the development of the country and the development of the nation altogether. So I hope this is the thing that we have to study over a period of time here. Let's wait what Election Law Commission of India is going to uh, reply on this section. In Uttar Pradesh, a man has constructed temple for Yogi Adityanath. He said that he is impressed by the work that the chief minister is performing, and hence he has constructed this. Obviously, everyone has their fundamental rights; they can do anything. Now, the opposition is saying, the opposition is quite worried about this, and it is saying that Mr. Yoginath is 2 steps ahead. Yogi Adityanath is 2 steps ahead of Prime Minister in publicity. This is something which they are saying, but nonetheless, when it comes to the so-called public life, it is not done by the so-called the Chief Minister himself, a man who is devotee of the so-called CM, who has liked the CM's work. He has done that. Nothing big here. Only opposition is making that statement. That's completely fine. Now, because if you look at South India, right, there was an actress called Namita. Fans of Namita have constructed a temple for her. Leave about chief minister, right? For film stars, we are having temples, right? But BJP is also saying that some members of BJP also are saying that this is quite ridiculous, because we should not have a temple for a living person. That is something which is, if something is present, you can write how people are passionate about their uh, likings and dislikings. You can write these things. Now, let's go to one more serious issue: PHS notification on convicts biometrics. Nice. Ministry of Home Affairs has notified some rules for the Criminal Procedure Identification Act, and it has empowered the police to obtain physical and biological samples of convicts and of those who are accused of crimes. So you get the so-called physical and biological samples. What does it include? Finger impressions, palm prints, facial prints, footprints, iris, retina scans, physical and biological samples. You can collect anything of a convict so that it will be stored in a database. If in future if there is a crime, they can match this with this data and they can easily catch hold the convict. That is what they are saying. Now, who can do this? A person who is not below the rank of superintendent of police. The minimum rank should be SP or higher than SP. They are the persons who can take these measurements, right? Moving on, Chhattisgarh High Court nixes means repels quota laws. It calls it unconstitutional. Let me give quickly. Uh, Quotas are the so-called affirmative actions to help the so-called downtrodden sections. However, Supreme Court in many cases said that the quota limitation should not cross more than 50%, but Chhattisgarh government gave reservation to the locals beyond 50%, going for 58%. As a result, the High Court of Chhattisgarh clearly said this is unconstitutional. Where you can write this in the so-called reservations, you can write this in the so-called how states are becoming very protectionist in their attitude, right? You can use these things, and how far these things are going to compromise merit and uplift the so-called downtrodden sections. So you can write these things in that area. So this is what the thing is. Now China defense move to block Lashkar elite terrorists. Now, where you can use this, how China is countering India in United Nations Security Council or United Nations. Now, India asked the United Nations members to list those people who were behind the so-called Mumbai terror attacks to be recognized as global terrorists. To make a person to be recognized as global terrorist, what is the thing? All the members in the United Nations Security Council, the 5 P5 member countries, has to give approval. But China is acting as a stumbling block for making the people to be designated as the so-called global terrorists. Now, what is the case? Lashkar-e-Toiba chief, right? Sazid Mir, who is wanted for 26 by 11 Mumbai terror attacks, is lodged in Pakistani jail. And what government of India is saying that this elite chief has to be named as the so-called global terrorist, but China blocked this, and China now it is uh, defending why it has blocked. So it is defending its move. This is not the first time that China has did it. Earlier also China did the same thing with elite deputy chief called Abdur Rahman Makki and JEM chief called Asgar. Remember the names? Asgar, Makki, Sazid Mir. So that in internal security you can write, so that in international cooperations you can write, so that you can write this in the fighting against terrorism, how some countries are backstabbing India, or how some countries are indirectly supporting the so-called terrorist organizations or non-governmental organizations who are creating threats to the so-called India. All right, non-state actors creating threats to India, such as LET, JEM. So remember the names: Sajid Mir, uh, Abdul Rahman Makki, and Asgar, JEM chief, deputy chiefs, and the so-called deputy chief of elites. Right. In 2019, also China, until 2019, China also created much blocks to the so-called to keep sanctions on JEM chief Masood Azhar, but only in 2019 it has given proposal. Initially, it has blocked many attempts. In several instances, they have blocked even for Masood Azhar, but after that, they have given a clear hit. Now, all these are discussed in United Nations Security Council's 1267 committee. 1267 committee of United Nations Security Council discusses about the so-called sanctions on a particular country who is harboring global terrorists. Now, to designate a person as global terrorist, this committee will be looking at it. That is called 1267 UN Security Council Committee. Now, former Punjab Chief Minister Amrinder Singh merges his party with BJP to fight his state. Now, if you look at this person called Amrinder Singh, initially he was the Chief Minister of the state in Punjab from the Congress party, but after that he has come out of Congress party and then he has floated his own party known as Punjab Local Congress PLC, and then they have contested the elections, but in Punjab they have lost the elections. Now he has been going with the so-called BJP. Where you can use this? You can use this. The ideological differences between the parties are nowhere today, because at one point of time he used to be the head of the Congress. Now he is going into the so-called BJP. So which means politics were diluted today without any strong ideological base. Rather, you can write at some points of time it is something called personal benefits or the benefits of the individuals at large, which is playing a very crucial role in politics. Nonetheless, you can write these things in the so-called polity, you can write these things in the so-called ethics, you can write these things in the so-called essay also. Right. Next. No negotiations at the cost of food security. What does this mean? Our agricultural minister, Mr. Tomar, has been attending some international conferences, and he is saying that if someone is restricting the so-called subsidies or restricting some support that India is giving to the farmers, we won't negotiate with it. So he says that today we are living in a situation where the world is struggling from the so-called world is heading for a population of 9 billions. The population today is 8 billions. We are heading towards 9 billions. There is huge hunger in all the countries, right? Impending climate change crisis is also at the doorsteps of the globe. At these circumstances, if you are limiting a farmer who is producing crops by your WTO norms or WTO restrictions, then that cannot be entertained anymore. This is what Mr. Tomar has said. So he is saying that we cannot negotiate at the cost of food security. What does this mean? This is in the context of WTO. In WTO asks the member states to restrict the subsidies. That is called, we call in the WTO terminology, it is called as boxes. The green box, the red box, the amber box, right? The blue box, right? So what it is saying is, he is speaking in that context, right? This is something which is related to it, but just remember this: we cannot negotiate. The world is going for 9 billions. Climate is changing. Hence, WTO norms which restricts the farmer subsidies cannot be entertained anymore. You can use this at some point of time. Now, can states impose limits on students' fundamental rights in classroom? This is something which is related to the hijab incident in Karnataka, where now the hearings were being discussed in the Supreme Court. What court is asking is, fundamental right of citizen cannot be restricted anywhere, whether you are in your bedroom, whether you are in classroom, whether you are in outside the society, it cannot be restricted. So wearing hijab is a fundamental right. If you think that, you can wear it to the schools. That is what the discussion is going on. We have to wait what Supreme Court says. This is a discussion which is going on. This will continue for the next 1 week until the Supreme Court gives its judgment. So let's hold on for this also. Taliban releases American veteran in prison swap. So there was one prisoner from the so-called Taliban area who has been convicted in the so-called US prison, and they have also captured one US veteran journalist, and they were holding him as a hostage. Now they have exchanged these people. So this is something where you can study. Why? Because in 2001, America entered into the so-called Afghanistan by saying that Operation Enduring Freedom, where we will abolish the so-called Taliban, we will eliminate Taliban, we will give freedom. But now look at the negotiations that they are doing. Which means in international relations, there is nothing called permanent friends or permanent enemies, but there is always something called permanent interest. So in this context, you can write this type of answers, right? So this is something where you can look at it. Oil Ministry seeks reviews of windfall tax once certain fields exempted. Recently, the government of India has kept some taxation on the so-called windfall tax, right? Oil Ministry seeks review on windfall tax once certain fields exempted, right? Now, what is this windfall tax? Windfall tax is that tax that is kept on the so-called oil refineries who have gained immense profits because of the sudden rise of oil prices. What do I mean by this? Say, for example, if there is an oil refinery, it is producing some oil, it has procured that oil at a low cost. Now, after refining, it has got huge profits because of increased global demand or increased oil prices. Now, because of this, whatever the profit that they gained, government of India is taxing them, and these profits are known as windfall profits. It has come out of wind. That is why they are taxing it. This is called windfall tax, where they can use this in the context of some prelims. That's it, right? Nothing more. So this is for the day. We have only these things. So Scandinavian social democracy, not much thing. The significance of Ethereum, merge of future of cryptocurrencies. So this is something about cryptocurrencies and bitcoins. No need to worry about these technicalities. Let's restrict only to those things which are important. So this is for the day. This is the content that we have to take from today's newspaper. I will make a separate video on AP Shah's article in this regarding about the so-called judges of Supreme Court and High Court and how the judiciary is. Hope you are enjoying our videos. Please subscribe to our videos. We'll be making these type of videos regularly. It will be helping many aspirants with our outreach. We are also trying to increase our team so that it will help us to connect to a larger world. Right? Thanks for joining. Have a nice day. Take care.